In the year 2021, global terrorism claimed the lives of over 7,000 people, nearly half of them in sub-Saharan Africa. And that threat still exists, particularly in the Sahel region. But what's fueling it? A new report says the main driver of violent extremism in sub-Saharan Africa is mainly the lack of jobs. The UN Development Programme interviewed more than 2,000 people in 8 countries, stretching from Burkina Faso to Somalia. Half of them were former members of violent extremist groups. And I'm joined now by the report's lead author, Nerina Kiplagat, the UNDP Regional Peace-Building Advisor for Africa. She joins us from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Welcome to DW News Africa, Nerina. Now, one of your findings in this report is that sub-Saharan Africa is the new global epicenter of violent extremism. What did the people tell you when you interviewed them?
Thank you for having me. Indeed, it does highlight the fact that sub-Saharan Africa has become the global epicenter of violent extremism. And this is based on data from the Institute of Economics and Peace, who released the annual Global Terrorism Index. And from the index, we see that 4 out of the 10 most affected countries globally are in sub-Saharan Africa. Indeed, we've seen the spread in terms of looking at risk as well as affected areas now to the Gulf of Guinea, the Great Lakes region, as well as Southern Africa, most specifically Mozambique. What we heard from some of the respondents, the most cited reason for joining was really hope for better employment, a better life. And this was cited by about 25% of the respondents. There was also a lot of influence from peers and family. We found women tended to join with family members, particularly their husbands, about 60%. And 61% of men tended to join with friends, so more of the peer influence. Many of these voluntary recruits experienced a tipping point. And of those who experienced a tipping point, 71% of them cited, heavy-handed government security action, so that, violated human rights as the tipping point for them joining the group. So that was quite significant.
And how prevalent were actual religious extremist views among the people you interviewed?
Not prevalent, I would say, very low, particularly considering that those who did cite ideological reasons for joining were very few, to about 17%, which we've seen a decrease from our first study in 2017. And furthermore, when we looked at the reasons of why people joined, the most cited reason was disillusionment around the group's ideology. So about 60% cited that they did not believe anymore in the beliefs of the group. So this was not a significant factor.
Can you go into detail about what these approaches are? You talk about people being disillusioned. Is it sort of that the jobs appear and then everybody goes back to normal and security is back as we hope it should be?
Well, what's important, and I think this is also why we continue to invest in research, is really the need to have these informed, approaches. And a lot of the, elements and push and pull factors are based on local conditions. So looking at, more of this contextualized approaches in terms of looking at what were these local level grievances. So it's going beyond jobs. It's also building social contract, building trust with security and community, investing in these peripheral borderland areas. We also see that people feel marginalized. So really doing more investment in these areas, which have been identified as high risk, where there are high numbers of recruitment. And this is important in terms of the prevention element, as we see the drivers of the voluntary recruits into violent extremism. But it is also as important for those leaving and, not having people who are already disillusioned and returning to the same factors and conditions which drove them to join violent extremist groups in the first place. So the importance of that, and we see this in the work, for example, we do on stabilization, prevention of violent extremism, and also trying to apply more of this peace building and preventative approach within development so that we can really look at sustainable peace. So it's really looking at more of this comprehensive package of how do we achieve sustainable peace and development.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Nerina Kiplagat from the UNDP Regional Office in Africa. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And the insecurity in the countries surveyed isn't just affecting their own populations, it's also creeping across borders. Take Burkina Faso, for example. It became the center of a jihadist insurgency in West Africa after violence spilled over from neighboring Mali. Since 2015, thousands of Burkinabe have been killed and 2 million displaced. Many of those who flee the conflict find refuge with their neighbors across the border. The hosts offer what they have, but as DW correspondent Maxwell Suuk reports from Widnaba in northern Ghana, there's goodwill in abundance, but even that's not enough.
Amabile Elisha Afugu and his family may not have much to go around themselves, but that's not limiting their generosity. Like many residents here, Afugu is feeding dozens of Burkinabe refugees who fled across the border.
This kind of Boko Haram and jihadists, we heard them years back. That was somewhere in Nigeria. We never knew it would come close to us here, but it has come. So it's theirs today. Tomorrow may be ours, and where will we run to? So if they come, then we don't treat them well. I think the day it will happen to us too, we will not know where to go.
Widnaba is just a short walk from Burkina Faso. Thousands of displaced Burkinabes crossed to Ghanaian settlements following a recent attack. Many people here are from the same ethnic group as the new arrivals, but they say they need more help from the government to continue hosting, feeding, and providing shelter for them.
These good Samaritans are stepping in where official support is lacking, and they are helping out even though they themselves lack the resources and infrastructure. The government says its decision not to intervene is strategic.
What we're also trying to prevent was trying to create a condition in which, it will be more people will be attracted into the area. And also, we didn't also need that because these were people who came in and straight away they melted into, the areas because people were actually ready to take them on, to let them be in their houses.
Locals say NADMO, Ghana's disaster management agency, only came to count the people. 1 month after the arrivals, they have had no support. The communities feel left on their own with the responsibility of caring for them. This man is one of those who were forced to flee. He described the daily horror back in Burkina Faso.
There were plenty of military helicopters flying patrols over our homes. They came over and over again every day, but they'd only fly for about 5 minutes. Then at night, the bad men came in their vehicles and set the jihadists loose. Even if they killed 1,000 of them today, another 1,000 would appear. We cannot go back there.
Reserves held by families hosting the refugees are starting to run low, with some even selling their livestock to help their guests. But they warned one day their resources will be finished.
That will be a big problem. Then we have to beg from people we think they are better than us to survive till the next rainy season.
For now, generous Ghanaians are keeping body and soul of the refugees together whilst they wait for peace to be restored back home.
The next guest is Dr. Juma Ayondele, a researcher into how African states and their allies fight against jihadism. Welcome to DW News Africa, Dr. Ayondele. Now, when we look at the distribution of jihadist violence across the Sahel region, there are clear hotspots, northern Nigeria and the Lake Chad area, Mali, and then the spread to Burkina Faso. Is there a threat of this engulfing other West African states?
Yes, thank you for your question and thank you for having me in the segment. There is this threat of violent extremist groups engulfing other surrounding and neighboring countries, especially if African governments are not necessarily addressing the social grievances that are spurring these groups to manipulate the teachings of Islam for their own interests in their recruitment and mobilization efforts. We know with the pandemic, African countries are strapped economically, but there is a need to provide social safety nets so that there aren't any economic incentives for these groups to actually be able to recruit young adult populations that make up, Africa in their efforts to expand their areas of operation. So yes, there is a very impending threat if we don't do anything about it.
Looking at countries like Mali and Burkina Faso who have turned away from Western forces like France and Germany, and they're embracing Russia in the fight against jihadists. Do you think this will solve their security problem?
No, especially if we don't address the local grievances. I mean, when it comes to the physical securitization of territories, it is very important because that proves to the citizens, especially in places like Mali and Burkina Faso, that the military juntas are actually doing something about the deteriorating security conditions in those countries. But what comes next after physical securitization? And that is why development solutions, initiatives have to be implemented side by side and not after the fact. That's what we have been seeing in the last 10 years with, okay, we secure these footholds where jihadists have their areas of operations, and then we can then do capacity or initiative buildings, and that is not working. So side by side is how we should actually think about addressing the increasing spread of violent extremism, especially in these hotspot regions.
And you've also argued that this should be taken from a perspective of decolonization?
Of course, yes. And when I mean that, that is community-based initiatives, bringing traditional leaders, community leaders into regional strategies as well as national strategies, and not just state actors as we see them today. So what roles do non-military actors play when it comes to de-radicalization, when it comes to capacity building, when it comes to conflict management? These are the reasons why we have to, in whatever solutions we propose, have it grounded in an African reality and in an African perspective, because these are the people that are facing a lot of these issues and problems and are seeing it day to day. So there's a need for us to be humble as security practitioners, as policy practitioners, when wanting to help these communities themselves.
Okay, Dr. Juma Ayondele, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you very much.